The Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast is meant to provide support and inspiration for those on a journey of recovery. We are not affiliated with any specific 12-step groups. Our goal is to share personal experiences and insights that may be helpful to listeners in their own recovery process. Please consult with a healthcare professional or therapist for personalized advice and guidance. Thank you for listening and welcome to the Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast. Hey everyone, this is Kevin with the Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast. Today I have a very good friend of mine, Eric S., in the studio. Sobriety date is March 23rd, 2008, and that's 16 years.
Yeah, 16 years of continuous recovery, and I'm really grateful for that.
Congratulations on that. That's awesome. So, Eric, I want to start off with tell me a little bit about your early days before you got sober. Go ahead and paint the picture for us about, leading up to getting sober. Tell me about your early days and maybe the first time you used drugs and alcohol, and lead us on that story.
Okay. All right. So I'll just introduce myself in the kind of classic way. I'm Eric. I'm an addict, alcoholic. My sobriety date's March 23rd, 2008, as Kevin said. And it's been a journey, man. For me, the early days. Oh, actually, I'm gonna start with something funny. Kevin asked me to start with something funny, so here we go. All right. What do meth addicts and Mormons have in common?
What's that?
They both put on backpacks, ride bikes, and go on missions.
That's great.
All right. So going into my early days, I like to start with my family background. I grew up in Northeast Portland. I was the oldest out of like two brothers and two sisters. I had an interracial family. My father was African American and my mother was Jewish and white. And I grew up in a pretty much all African American neighborhood. My mom was an addict. My stepfather was an alcoholic. And, they both used for a lot of my lifetime, but my mom got sober when I was around 7 years old. She went to prison for writing prescriptions. And then when she got out, she never really did drugs again. But my stepfather was an alcoholic, and my mom became just a completely sick, untreated Al-Anon, and every day her life mission was to control his drinking, which, if I'm, I always tell the new people that I work with in the professional field that, like, if I'm powerless over my addiction, I'm definitely powerless over yours, But my mom didn't know that, so I grew up with this message that, as an alcoholic, if you loved us, you would stop, And of course, my stepdad was never able to stop, but I remember a lot of like solemn oaths or real promises. He made a lot of promises to the family that he was going to make a change that never really came together for him. But there was this cycle that happened in my family, He would drink and that would go on for a number of days. He'd crash a car, he'd lose a job, and then he'd come home, right? Mom would kick him out. He'd come home and he'd make promises and there'd be this honeymoon phase and he would stay sober for a while, and then he'd something would happen and he would start drinking again. And mom could smell it over the phone, He'd call home like, babe, I'm coming home. And she'd be like, that mother effer, and she'd be ready to get him, And as soon as he got home, there'd be this huge eruption. There'd be some domestic violence. The cops would come. Somebody'd go to jail, usually him. And then that cycle would go over and over and over again, and that was kind of the flow in life, coming from a really large kind of like ethnically different family, like I was never enough for either side, like I definitely am a white kid that's Jewish that grew up in Northeast Portland, but I lived in an all black neighborhood with an all black family. I went to all black schools, and so like when I was with the Jewish kids, I was never Jewish enough. When I was with the white kids, I was was kind of too weird because I hung out with all black people. When I was with the black kids, I was never black enough, and so I always just felt separated. Like my family really loved me. My grandparents loved me. My aunts and uncles loved me. In my head, though, I always thought they loved me less because I was different, that odd duck, right? Like I'm the swan in the story, I'm that weird little odd duck that doesn't quite fit in. And I always felt like I was on the outside looking in, like if you see those postcards that they have for around Christmas time, like there's a beautiful bungalow and there's Christmas decorations all on the outside of the bungalow. And there's a window that looks in, and inside the house, there's this beautiful family, and they all love each other, and they're all just cozy, and there's just this acceptance. And I always felt like I was the guy standing outside looking through the window. I never felt like I was inside the house, And little things would happen along the way. My family went to Louisiana at one point, and I didn't get to go. And I was positive that was because I was the odd duck. I was the Jewish kid out of the family that wasn't mixed, wasn't African American or whatever. And ruthlessly made fun of my sister about it, though. I've always called her bluish, which is black and Jewish. Don't know if that's appropriate, but I also told her she was adopted a lot. So I guess I kind of took that out on the kids because I was the oldest. But that really what I'm trying to highlight here is that cycle that happened in my family, that drinking, making promises, and then not being able to keep them, and the big message in my family was, if you loved us, you would stop. So I grew up kind of believing it, right? Like I grew up like, man, my dad's a piece of shit. Like he does not want to stop, and he obviously doesn't love us. Mom said he doesn't love us. He's not stopping, and I developed this like major fear of like riding in the car with him. He was always so belligerent, and a few times we got in car accidents, and so like anytime we got behind another car, I would just be like panicked, I would just get this anxiety. It would jump into my chest, and that was really a thing that's carried along with me all the way through my journey, is this like feeling of anxiety, which I'm just now starting to deal with, So basically, I grew up with a really sick, untreated Al-Anon and a pretty hardcore alcoholic. And, those two things, I guess they're made for each other, but they don't really mix well, And so that was like the early stages of my childhood, I get to be around 10, maybe 9 years old, I start making promises to myself, like I'm never going to drink. I'm not going to do drugs. Also growing up in the 80s in Portland, gangs were really starting to hit the streets pretty hard. Crack cocaine became a huge part of the neighborhood. And, everybody around me was like, those people are real worthless. You don't want to do drugs. You don't want to be a part of that. So I had made these promises to myself that I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to hang out with gang members. I wasn't going to, drink or use. I definitely wasn't going to be doing crack or methamphetamine or anything like that. Like I was going to be a different kid. But, that only lasted so long. Fast forward, I get to be about 16 years old, and my journey begins. I'm going to Madison High School. I meet my first girlfriend that I ever had in my entire life. She gets pregnant right away. I met like a group of friends who were all kind of like somewhat hippie-ish, somewhat gangster-ish. I didn't really mix, but one thing they had is they had weed. And I remember that first time I'm standing in this circle, and they break out this weed and this alcohol, and it was like somebody's parents had this crazy liquor cabinet, so it was like, who knows what it was. It was schnapps mixed with, just a whole plethora of different, weird alcohol mixes, but it was in this big jar, and they start passing this thing around, and I take a hit off that joint, man, and I'm like, holy moly, this is what my dad was talking about. Like, this is what it is, right? Like, this is the magic. I had found it, and instantly, instead of being that kid that was looking in through the window, I felt like I was inside the house. Like now, all of a sudden, I belong. Like it's Christmas Day, it's Hanukkah, it's New Year's, it's my birthday. There's a celebration happening, right? And it's all happening within my heart, within my soul, right? Like just fireworks are going off around me, and I found the magic, man, and it was alcohol and drugs. So that begins this journey, right? Like now all of a sudden I'm no longer keeping those vows to myself, and I believe the disease of addiction is progressive. That I didn't start at the very bottom that first day. It took a period of time for me to start to really break myself down. I think when you make one bad decision, it's really easy to make the next bad decision, and then the next bad decision, and there's just a spiral that happens, and. So I pick up that first drug. I'm taking off. The disease is taking off, and I got this girlfriend. She's pregnant. We have my daughter at 16. I get my own place. I moved up. I got a really fancy house at the Columbia Villa, which is it used to be the Portland Projects, and I'm living a life, right? Like I got food stamps. I got a job. I got a kid's mom. We got welfare, and I'm surrounded by gang members, and my using starts to go out of control. I find a kid in the neighborhood who's on Ritalin, and I negotiate and I manipulate, and all of a sudden now every time he gets his prescription, I get his prescription. And so I'm doing Ritalin, I'm smoking meth, I'm occasionally doing cocaine, and I'm working at fast food. I'm dropping out of high school. I'm having a baby, and it was really fun. If I'm honest, that time in my life was really fun, right? And I always call that stage of alcoholism and addiction, using without consequences, because I didn't have any voice of reason at that point. Nobody cared in my life, it felt like. It was just this really fun party. It was somewhat innocent, and there was no consequences. Nobody cared. I didn't lose a job. I didn't lose a girlfriend. I didn't lose a house. Nothing happened. It was good, and I really think that the disease, that's when it got the hooks in me, That's when it started to really get me taking me to the next levels, So using without consequences is a pretty cool stage of addiction, and I think that every single person out there who's listening to this podcast, you guys can relate to that, right? To that beginning stage, when it's just magic and beauty, and that's what happened. And then I get to my second stage of addiction, right? And the second stage is called, for me, what I call it is using but being dishonest. And this is a whole different thing, right? I watched that really sick cycle happen in my family over and over and over again, where my dad said, "I love you, and I'm not going to do this anymore," and he promised, and I could see on his face that he meant it, and I get to that, that point. I move into the Pier Park Apartments, which is in North Portland. Still, I'm in, and if you're not from the Oregon area, North Portland in the 80s and the 90s was heavily gang infested. It was probably the worst neighborhood you could live in. It was super cheap though, and I move into these apartments with my kid's mom. We get an upstairs apartment, and this girl from Scappoose moves into the apartment downstairs, And all of a sudden, there's this alien in the neighborhood, and I still live in a 98% African American neighborhood, right? So it's me, and then no other white people, and then this girl from Scappoose moves in, right? And she was in the military. She was 19 years old. She had a body that was insane. She had a smile. She saw that I had a daughter, and she wanted a baby, and all of a sudden I'm hooking up with a girl downstairs, right? So my kid's mom lives upstairs, and I'm hooking up with the girl downstairs, right? This is insanity, This is not healthy at all. I didn't even there was only a set of stairs separating me from the girl that I was cheating on, my ex with, and so we get together, and she's a cool girl, right? Her name was Heidi. We were together for 6.5 years. We actually have 2 sons together, but the only thing about her was that she didn't want me to use drugs. Which was just a very odd thing to me, I thought, but I learned now that I loved her enough to lie about it, I thought I could quit at points, and I found myself just playing out that same cycle that was in my family, if you took away the domestic violence, I never beat her or hit her or anything like that, but what happened was, I would use, and then, I would hide it, and I would be lying, and this is the dishonesty, and then eventually she would figure figure it out because, I mean, you can't keep secrets really from someone you live with, you know. And eventually she'd figure it out. There'd be this huge eruption. I'd make promises, you know, there'd be a honeymoon phase, and then I'd use again. And I remember distinctly a few times where I was like fed up, right? Like, I'm done with this. You know, this is 6.5 years, you know, I'm going to quit. Like, and I looked her dead in her eyes, and I meant it with all my heart and my soul. And, you know, if I could do it with my own will, I would have been sober ever since, you know. And I get to work later on. I worked at a bar at that time. I worked at McMinimans on 33rd and Killingsworth. And, you know, I'd get to work and the disease would start talking to me in my own voice, you know, and it'd say shit like, well, it's only marijuana, you know, like she's not even going to notice that, you know, it's not methamphetamine. There's no problem with that, you know, and for anybody out there who's struggled with a little bit of speed issues, you know, there's nothing worse than doing methamphetamine at work and then getting home and then laying in bed and pretending like you're sleeping the entire night, you know. I mean, it's just horrible, you know. It's like, I mean, getting up, I'd get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning and start getting ready for work at 2 p.m., you know, which is crazy. That's laying there and pretending like you're asleep is just the worst feeling, you know. And that cycle played out for a long time. So I had a couple of strategies I employed, you know, and this is when like the controlled drinking and controlled using kicks in, right? Like I start to like look for the right cocktail, you know. I remember one of my strategies was like when I got the job interview, I'd do all the drugs and alcohol that I like to do. That way, you know, the employer would think this is how I normally always am. You know, it was just like, you know, if I show up completely loaded, then when I'm loaded on the job, they won't even notice. I'll just blend in. It'll just be a natural thing, you know? And so, you know, I start to do downers at night and uppers in the morning and, you know, try to find that perfect cocktail so that nobody notices that I'm loaded all the time, which, of course, is like completely unrealistic. And now I know that. Back then I was blind to that, though, you know. So you know, I'm in this lifestyle, and eventually I decide that I need to get a job and I need to move away right around 9/11. I already have, you know, 2 kids with her, and I moved to Fresno with a neighbor, right? And I'm going to learn how to set tile. I'm going to become a construction worker now because that's going to be a healthy change, right? And like as soon as we started driving to Fresno, I was doing lines, and I just got completely messed up. I did get a job. I did learn how to do tile, but of course I was down in California for a couple of years. My kid's mom was up here. I'm having a baby down there with somebody else. I just ran amok the whole time, you know. And then eventually that girl was always there for me, so I could always just come back to Oregon and just go right back to her house and, you know, have a place to stay and have a warm meal or whatever. And she wanted me to be a dad to the kids and whatever. And so that was just that insanity, man. Like I was always just trying to run from myself to find a new way and doing the geographical change, and it just never worked at all, you know. Eventually, though, it moves on to the third stage of addiction, and the third stage is a much different situation, you know. In about the year 2000, 2001, I can't remember exactly, my stepfather was murdered, and you know, all the time before this, I was using because it was really fun. You know, at least that's what I thought. You know, I didn't realize that I was in the grip of a continuing and progressive illness that was taking me where it was taking me. You know, I didn't know that that addiction is like a train that's driving in one direction, jails, institutions, and death. I didn't know that. You know, I thought I was just having fun. You know, but the using but just being dishonest thing just really creates this internal sort of spiritual warfare. You know, like it kind of starts to corrupt your soul in some ways, you know, because on the one hand, I love these people so much, and on the other hand, this disease has me and I can't stop, but I don't know that, you know. And when my actions go in one direction, but my moral compass is going in the other direction, it just creates internal chaos, you know. So my stepdad ends up dying, and then the third stage kicks in, right? And this was using to cover up the pain. You know, covering up the pain is a totally different thing, right? Because there's a book that we read in the professional counseling arena when you become an alcohol and drug counselor. They have like a number of books you read, and one of the books that you read is by a doctor who's from Canada. His name's Gabor Mate, and the book is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghost. right? And I'm not gonna tell you a lot about the book. It's a really good book, but basically, you know, this idea of the realm of hungry ghosts is that, like, the Buddhists believe that there's different realms of existence, right? And in this hungry ghost realm, there's these creatures that live there, and they're like these giant hippopotamus bodies, right? Like, they have these huge bodies, but they have these little tiny chihuahua mouths. You know, they're just starving to death. They're just so hungry, right? Like, they never get full. There's just this complete emptiness that's just like this vacuum that can't ever be, you know, filled, you know? And when I'm using at this third stage of addiction where I'm you know, I'm using to cover up the pain. That's where I'm in that hungry ghost realm, right? Like I keep throwing alcohol and drugs in, but it's not filling up the void. You know, there's just this need for more. You know, and I have a friend, you know, Michael, who always says I suffer from the addiction of more. You know, and that's where I was at. You know, and I'm chasing this thing, and I'm chasing it, and I'm chasing it, and I'm trying to like not feel the feelings of my dad dying, not feel the feelings of not being there for my kids. You know, I end up breaking up with Heidi because, you know, at this point I can't, you know, she can't stand in the way of my disease anymore. I'm unwilling to lie to her about it. I'm unwilling to try to hide it. I'm unwilling to try to self-will, you know, into sobriety with it anymore. You know, at this point I need to use to live, you know. And so then I get this bright idea, because I'm an idea guy, right? So I get this bright idea. I should find a girl who likes to drink and use as much as I do. You know, then all my problems will be answered, right? Like, I won't have this problem. I won't have to be dishonest. I can just be totally open. I'll be able to just have fun, and I'll reclaim the glory days, right? Like, I'll get back to that beginning when there was no consequences. You know, it'll be fun, right? Like, it'll be like being a teenager all over again, right? So I meet my youngest son's mom, and if you guys are keeping track now, I'm on my like 5th child, right? Like, so I'm 25 years old. You know, I've been using since I'm 15. Dropped out of high school. You know, unemployable. And I got like 5 kids. Child support starting to pile up. You know, consequences in life are starting to pile up. There's kind of some jail time happening here. But so I meet my youngest son's mom, and she's beautiful. You know, she's got a you know, she has a mom who's like a lifelong meth dealer, you know, so perfect, right? Like, there's gonna be no problem, you know. She knows how to hustle, she knows how to live on the streets, you know. She's what I need right now, right? Like, I can hide from my emotions, I can feed my addiction, and I can still have love in my life, right? And so there we go. We're off and running, right? And you know, getting with the girl that wants to use like you do is like totally bad idea. You know, there was no more balance, you know, like and part of that was like, I was like self-destructing at my ex, you know. It was like all those years I tried to hide it. I was like, I'm going to show her, you know, I'm going to use, you know, 3 times harder than I would have. And the disease progressed. You know, that's what happened. The disease progressed. So I'm running around. I'm in this insanity. Me and this girl are totally unhealthy and toxic. You know, we're smoking drugs. We're shooting drugs at this point. We're you know, I mean, it's just a all bad scene, right? Like, I'm learning how to I'm learning how to commit crimes now. I'm learning how to shoplift. I'm staying up for days on end, and I start to develop drug-induced psychosis, which is a huge part of my story, right? And then all of a sudden, that thing that was helping me mask what I was feeling, it started to amplify the pain I was trying to hide from, you know. It was almost like it started to like not work, you know. Like, I would drink and use, and then it would just amplify the pain. It was horrible, you know. And that was a third stage, man. Like, I won't go into great detail there, but I'll just say that I ended up in jails and institutions. You know, like that train that I was talking about, the jails, institutions, and death train was continuing to progress, and I'm going down this path. My kid's mom gets robbed for like $30,000 in Fresno, California, because that's where we should go, right? Like, you know, as the disease progressed, the people you hang out with get worse and worse and worse, right? So I moved to California. We get robbed by this, you know, this whole gang hit happens, and it's a home invasion. It's like a serious robbery, right? Like, they kick the door in, they put guns to our head. It's like we could have died for sure. You know, she's like 8.5 months pregnant with my youngest son, and I developed PTSD. You know, and then all of a sudden I can't drink or use anymore, because every single time I do, the cartel's out to get me, the gangs are out to get me. You know, if you're wearing headphones, you're part of a conspiracy. You know, like, I'm seeing stuff, I'm hearing stuff, you know, and I just think this is it, man. Like this is it. Like, I'm gonna die. Like, these people are gonna kill me. me, and that didn't stop me. It took me like another 4 years to get sober after that, and every time I drank, every time I smoked pot, every time I did mushrooms, every time I did meth, I had this psychosis. So this was horrible, and I keep going back to the well because I think it's going to fix me. I think it's going to fill up that void, and it never does, End up in St. Vincent's, hospital. I'm there for like 60 days, and it's like my first meeting. I'm sitting in this circle. It's like this weird, like drool bus kind of circle, right? People are like all messed up on all these different drugs. It's really intense, and I hear that like recovery is possible, get out. I end up going to this church and starting my first recovery group, which was the Celebrate Recovery. Actually, was my very first meeting that I started going to. Did it for about 9 months, and then one day I had the bright idea that I would just get loaded again. Like they put me on a bunch of medications that had really sucked out my energy, and I thought, man, that's like I have no personality. I should just get loaded, And once I get loaded, it's a wrap, man. It's like I'm right back in that same cycle, So end up in jail for the last time in Columbia County, Oregon, and at this point I'm like realizing I'm having a spiritual problem. I remember really distinctly standing on the porch outside in St. Helens and telling my friend, like, I think I have a spiritual sickness, like something's really like wrong here. Like I can feel this evil in the world. And it was crazy. I had this like spiritual epiphany that like, if this much actual evil actually exists, because this stuff is real in my mind, right? There must be something good out there, there must be something opposite of this evil. There must be God. And I go to jail the very last time, and I get inside, and there's a chaplain that brings in AA to the jail, and this dude tells me that once I gave my life to God, I never had to go back to jail again, and he said crazy things like I learned how to turn things over, and I surrender, and I give up my will, and God has a plan, and I've never heard this stuff before, right? Like I'm Jewish. I grew up in a Jewish Catholic family that like we never talked about God at all unless somebody died. So this is a really intense idea that like, once I give my life to God, I can, get sober. So I get out, man. I go to this recovery house, and this is my whole treatment process, right? Like I never went to any organized treatment or anything like that. But I moved into this recovery house, and I had to go to 3 meetings a week, and that was the whole program. I had to get a job within 30 days and go to 3 meetings, And so I get into this recovery house. I'm looking at the wall. There's a meeting called Kick the Monkey, which I thought was a cool name, right? And so I'm like, fuck, I'm gonna check out Kick the. It sounds good to me, I got this monkey. I know about that. I'm going to go to this meeting, and I get to this meeting, Kick the Monkey, man. And I look on the wall and I see the steps, and it says God over and over and over again in the steps, and for me that it said God. It was like all of a sudden that chaplain, that spiritual warfare I was in before I got to recovery, it all kind of connected. And I realized that like this was the path I was supposed to be on, First meeting, really cool. Stayed in that group for many years, did a bunch of service there. But right around, 60 days, I'm going to move into my first relapse after I got really sober. So now I'm 60 days sober. I'm really passionate, right? Like I'm going to like 5 or 6 meetings a week. I'm living in that house. I got all this child support debt. So I'm not like, there's no other things I'm going to do, right? Like recovery is the only thing that I can afford to do, really. Meetings are free, right? So I'm going to meetings. I'm working at this little restaurant, and I meet this girl. I'm at this church group, and I meet this girl. She's like this really cute blonde girl. She's in college, right? And she goes to church, And so I don't know that many church people before I get sober. So I'm thinking like this has to be like a perfect person, Like there's no way I could get loaded with a person who's, goes to church and is in college, And so I start hanging out with her. Her name was Cammie. She was actually really cool. I actually didn't get loaded with her, but when I got over to her she lived in this kind of like fraternity house and they went to a college in Forest Grove. And when I got over to her house, her roommates were growing weed in the house. And this is 2008, right? Weed's not legal at all at this point, right? But it's fine because I got like 60 days of sobriety. I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm going to Narcotics Anonymous. And I'm thinking that, I can help them. Like I'm going to help her roommates. Like, I can't see the middle. All I see is these college kids are growing weed in their house. Like they're definitely going to die of heroin overdoses eventually. I need to like intervene here, And so I'm going over there and Cammie's cool. Like our whole relationship's built around spirituality. Like we never did anything. We were never like connected, like as far as like we were never in a relationship. We were just friends the whole time. And we prayed. We went to like all these, I learned all about God with her. It was a cool relationship, But one day I get in the car with her roommates, and I have to go like 6 blocks. This is not a very far ride, right? I get in the car and they light up this weed pipe in the car, But it's fine because I'm a pretty passionate member of the recovery community at this point, Like I have this wherewithal, this passion, this desire to stay sober and clean that's going to protect me, And they passed this thing around the first time, and with all of my just strength and might, I'm like, I absolutely will not smoke weed with you guys, Hell no. Like I feel disrespected that you would even ask me, And then they pass it around the second time, and I can just like feel my spiritual muscles get a little bit weaker, I start to deflate a little bit. But I still say no though. We're about 3 blocks into this thing. This car's starting to hot box, and they passed it around the third time, man. And like once it went around the third time, I was like, I just had this light bulb went off above my head. It was like, I actually love smoking weed. I smoked weed my entire life, And so I'm like, fuck yeah, let me hit that thing. I take this big old hit of marijuana, and that was March 22nd, 2008. That was my last relapse. I took one hit, and instantly I had drifted right back into that psychosis. But even worse than that, all of that like self-esteem I had built up over the last like 60 days was gone, Like I knew I was going to die out there, And in the Narcotics Anonymous literature, it says something like a relapse can be the thing that brings about a much more rigorous application of the program, And at that point, I got really, really serious about recovery. And I got really serious about who I hung around and when I hung around them and how long I stayed with them, I think that recovery is like a merry-go-round, It's like when you're standing in the center of that thing, it's totally safe, right? No matter how fast it's spinning, you're safe, And being in the center of recovery is going to meetings, working with the new guys, having a sponsor, just being active, right? Being in the center, it's a safe place to be. No matter how fast life is going on the outside, there's one thing in my life that's safe, that keeps me connected to recovery, that keeps me solid, But as soon as you start stepping to the edge, it's easy to fall off that thing, And I heard a speaker say one time that recovery is like unplug, disconnecting from recovery is like unplugging a refrigerator. When you unplug a refrigerator, what happens? Everything looks good on the outside, right? Everything looks fine. And we see a lot of guys come in with 90 days, and they get that really good job, they get that hot girlfriend, they get that cool house, they got the beautiful dog, and all of a sudden they have this huge giant life, but they have this little tiny program, and then they start to unplug from recovery. And what happens is like they start to get spiritually sick from the inside, So for me, it's really important that I don't take away from my recovery to add things to my life, that like gears that turn a system, they have to connect and sort of match, like if I get a new job, I don't take away 3 or 4, meetings because of these new work hours. I find meetings that would fit into the schedule with the job, and so that's what I tell people. I start working the steps, I start sponsoring. I had this sponsee one time, so I'm about 9 months sober, and I was about 9 months sober. I got this sponsee. He's like one of my first sponsees, and he overdoses. And I am just devastated as a new guy in recovery, and I'm like the shoulda, woulda, couldas are just hitting me so hard, right? Like I should have talked to him more. I should have invited him to meetings. I should have reached out more, and I know now that I'm powerless over everybody's disease besides my own. Like I only, I'm not responsible for my addiction, but I am responsible for my recovery. But so I start having this fantasy all of a sudden around 9 months sober that like, what would I do if I was a normie, And at first I'm like, the first day I'm like, if I was a normie, geez, I would, I'd probably have like 1 or 2 beers after work sometimes, like normal people do, and that goes on for like a day. Then the next day I'm thinking, I'm still having this fantasy. I'm still resentful at the disease for my sponsee's overdose. the second day I'm thinking, if I was a normie, I might have like one bong hit in the morning before I go to work. That sounds normal, right? Like normal people do that, And then the third day rolls around and I'm thinking, probably like if I wanted to get something done, I'd do like occasional meth on the weekends, just like a little line here or there just to get by or whatever, And then, the fourth day rolls around. I'm thinking, and probably like on holidays, we would take mushrooms and acid, just because that sounds like a really fun thing you would do if you're a normal person, also while you're drinking and taking bong hits. And then it was like the fifth day that I realized that, dude, like normal people don't smoke weed, do meth, take bong hits, and eat acid. I'm a fucking addict, dude. What the hell is wrong with me? You know what I mean? Like what? And it was like this like major like light bulb going off. Like wow, like even when I fantasize about being a normal person, I think about using. So I am really sick, So so life goes on, man. I've bounced around a little bit. I've been in and out of like Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, even Sexaholics Anonymous. I am a big believer that whatever is the issue in your life that you need to work on, follow your recovery. Find the things that actually feed your recovery. Like I'm not a big like need to commit to one thing forever for the rest of my life. Like I want to do the things that are going to work for me, but I do think it's important to go to meetings. So I won't go deep into the steps. I have had the opportunity to sponsor a bunch of people, and I've taken a lot of guys through the steps. I've done the steps in a lot of different ways. But I do want to talk about the ninth step. So the ninth step, right? It's 2000. So the ninth step is going off, right? And I'm making amends to everybody, and it's working out, and I'm kind of making an amends to some people. Like I'm going to them, and I'm like, yeah, I did all these things, and I'm hoping that they say, don't worry about it, kid, just go out there and just do the best you can, right? Like I'm looking for a pass in most of these relationships, and I'm getting that pass in a lot of relationships, right? And I got a lot of fear around the people that are closest to me, right? Like my kid's mom, my mother, and so I finally get enough willingness and courage about a year and a half sober to make amends to my mom, and we're driving to Coos Bay to go meet with my grandma or whatever. I don't remember exactly what, but I'm doing this step work. I'm like in the car driving, my sponsor's texting me about it, and I'm supposed to do this 9-step on this mission, and I'm afraid to do the 9-step with my mom, like this is one relationship. This is the woman that I used over and over and over again, right? Like I was too proud to like hold a sign and like beg for money, but I could show up at my mom's house at 2:00 in the morning with a couple of tweakers in tow and like look for shit to steal, no problem, Like I was not ashamed to show up at her house at any time, night or day, and like try to like go through her purse and look for money or whatever, and I stole a bunch of jewelry from her house, and I had, I lived with her for free, and I got loaded, and we stole her car, and we stole her, like it just went on and on and on, right? And so I know that I owe her a major amends, and there's a lot of money connected to this, and there's a lot of spiritual and emotional pain connected to this, and so I'm telling my mother the truth, I'm telling her my part, like that I can remember from the days that I had used. I talked about the jewelry, the money that I stole, and I'm kind of deep down hoping that she'll give me a pass, like all these other relationships, right? Don't worry about it, kid. Just do the best you can, And she doesn't do that at all, Mom starts to lay it out there. I get to the end. My sponsor said, and make sure you ask at the end, like, is there anything I left out that hurt you that you want to talk about? And she was like, yeah, there's tons of shit you left out. When you were out there, you robbed me from my serenity. Every time somebody got murdered in Columbia County when you were living there, I knew it was you. Every time there was a car accident on the highway, I knew that you were going to be dead. Every time that there was like some gang related shooting, I knew you were going to be involved in it. There was years and years that I barely slept thinking and worrying about you. And so that really hit me really hard, and then at the end of this woman had kept track of all the money I had ever owed her, which I was totally shocked about. I thought this was write it off kind of situation, and so she calculates everything, and I'm somewhere around like $10,000 that I need to pay her, and so I get on a payment plan with my mother, and I start making these payments, man, and I part of that amends was making the payments that felt really good, and I paid her $300 a month for like many months and even years actually. And I also started spending time with her. Like every Saturday I'd go to her house and I'd help her clean around her house. I'd trim her bushes. I'd pick up her dog poop. I'd take her dog for a walk, And this is the amends process with my mother, right? Like I'm doing this every week and it feels really good. And I got some support around it. My wife's into it. Like we're doing it together. We're going to my mom, then we're going to her parents' house, right? So we're both making an amends to both of our parents this way. And it's really powerful, right? And then 2020, my mom dies, and one thing I forgot to say about the relationship with my mom is when I had 9 months, it was like Christmas Eve, and there was a big snowstorm in 2008. The snow was like 15 inches tall, which in Oregon that's a lot of snow for us. So this is a terrible storm for us, right? And I have 9 months that day. It's Christmas Eve, and I need to make it to the West Side Service Center to go to a meeting. And so I take the bus, I walk. I mean, this is a long journey to get to this meeting. I get to the meeting. It's a noon meeting, and I get my 9-month coin, and they used to have this little gift shop that sold like little coins, and they had these little tiny like Christmas boxes that were they looked like presents, but they only fit a coin in there. So it was like this little box that fit a coin, but it was like a gift wrap present. And so I get this coin and I bring it back. And so when I have 9 months, I give this thing to my mom. This is a Hanukkah gift from my mother. My mother was actually Jewish. I give her this gift and I say, here's a gift for you, And it was no big deal. Like she just took it. She said, oh, thanks. Congratulations on your 9 months or whatever. And we kind of just moved on, 2020, mom dies, right? And I've been making this amends now for years because I had 12 years sober when she died. So I've been making this amends for like 7 years or 10 years or something like that, right? Like long time I've been making amends with my mom. And so my mom dies and it's devastating, right? And me and my sister are at my mom's house. She had this little tiny apartment in Gresham in like the most ghetto neighborhood. I don't know why she liked that, but we're going through her stuff, man. Like when someone dies, you go through their stuff, and it's really painful. And we get to her jewelry box, right? And I see that like there's like 50 pieces of jewelry in this box that I had bought her over the years because I subconsciously kept buying her jewelry because I was so guilty for the jewelry that I had stolen over the years, And so I see all these pearls, I see all these things, and this is kind of a bigger jewelry box. It had like multiple shelves. You couldn't see everything in it when you first opened it. And I lift up this box and I look inside. And I get to the very bottom little cabinet inside this jewelry box, and there's that little box, that 9-month box. She had saved it the whole time, And it was like in the most precious place of like the most precious things that she owned, And that just showed me that mom really, really did value that gift that day, and it was the gift of sobriety, The gift of sobriety is what we gave her, Last thing I'll say on this podcast, I definitely did not make this up. I stole it from another speaker, but it's a really cool story. It's one of the oldest stories. I think they mostly tell it in Narcotics Anonymous. I'll say it in AA sometimes, but it's about a father and a son. And so there's a father and a son, right? The father is like one of those like top, 1 percentile type of people. He's like, has this huge, income and this, he runs all these businesses and he's just really, really busy, basically that's the moral of the story there. He's a really busy dad. And, he has this son that just wants to hang out with him, and the son's always with nannies, always at, private school, always just, the dad doesn't have time for this kid basically, and so the kid's always wanting to do stuff with his dad, but the dad never has time because he's just so busy, building this empire in his life or whatever, and he works from home a lot of days. And so this kid keeps running into his office and he just wants to get the last couple of hours of work done, and, So he's like, God, what can I do to get this kid out of my hair for a while, And he looks down on his desk and he has this great big world map on his desk, and it has all the countries and everything. And so he thinks, okay, I'm going to cut this world map up into pieces and I'm going to give it to the kid and I'm going to have him go, put it back together. I'll give him some tape. He could put it back together like a puzzle, and then he could bring it back. That'll be at least an hour, right? If I cut it into small pieces, and. So his son comes in and he's like, come on, Dad, let's go play ball. Let's go to the park. Let's go to the movies. He wants to do something with his dad. And his dad hands him this pile of, this map, right? Like it's all cut into pieces. And he hands him the tape. He says, hey, son, look, I will spend time with you. I promise we'll go do something after this. I just want you to take this map, go into the other room, take your time, put it all back together. And then once it's all back together, this is a game. You'll win the prize and we'll go do something, So his son leaves the room. He takes this map and the tape, and he goes out of the room. He's all excited. He's going to get to spend time with his dad, and he puts this thing back together in like 10 minutes. He shows back up in his dad's room and in his office, and his dad's like, "Oh my gosh, how did you put that together so fast?" And he said, "Well, Dad, it was really easy. On one side there was a map, but on the other side there was a man." So I decided just to put the man back together. When I put the man back together, the whole world came together really fast. And I think that's what we do in recovery. I think we learn how to put the man back together. Thanks.
That's an awesome story, Eric. Thank you for coming here today and sharing your story. Is there any final thoughts for someone who's maybe considering getting sober, or anything you would recommend for a newcomer?
I would just say, find the recovery community in your area, and plug into it. And I think the professional, I work in the recovery field. I think the professional community is important, but I don't think it's the end, right? Like, I think it's really important to find the natural supports, right? Go to your AA, go to NA, go to whatever's in your area. Go to that thing and really start making friends there, because that's going to be the thing that's with you throughout life. Your insurance can change. Your life can change, but like a worldwide fellowship is going to be worldwide and free and available. So I think that if you don't do anything else right in recovery, if you at least go to meetings, you'll be reminded of what you're not doing.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Love you appreciate you coming in here. Thank you for sticking around to the end and listening to the Jaywalkers Recovery Podcast. Please share this episode with a friend. Have a blessed day.